Hope you're all well. Great to see some familiar names and faces. Hi, Carmel. And lots of faces and names I'm not familiar with, which is very exciting. You guys hearing me okay? Great. Okay. So my name's Heath, if you didn't know that. And I'm a trainer at Breathe Education. I'm a Pilates instructor. I run a Pilates business with my partner and have done for coming up on almost more than 10 years now. I think it's getting closer to 12. I've been a primary school educator, a special needs educator. I taught art to children with profound autism for about 10 years. I taught ceramics and sculpture briefly at university level. Been a nightclub bouncer, and my most proud achievement is I'm a dad. And in all of those things, what I'm really not good at is planning and systems. So it fascinates me that these community sessions keep coming back to me talking to you about systems and ways of planning to improve your Pilates work. So I was just musing on that before I came in. I'm a little bit random today. I apologise. I'm in day 3. I've just discovered of COVID. I knew I was feeling odd, but the rat tests were coming back negative, but they've come back positive now, which at least I know why I feel so weird. So here we are. Let's make what. So if I get weird, just maybe yell out, say, dude, you're being weird, and I'll try and come back to normal, whatever that means. So the mission today is to talk about lesson planning. And for me, lesson planning is part and parcel of long-term programming. Let's get stuck into it. Did anyone want to ask me anything, or did I say anything then that raises any questions for anyone about my history or anything? Otherwise, feel free to yell out. I'll be responsive. Did I ask if you're hearing me okay? I did, didn't I? And you are, because you gave me a thumbs up. Okay, let's have a little slide deck. Let's work our way through it. Ask questions at any stage, please. Do I do that? And I think you can see me now. Excellent. All right. So, lesson planning and long-term programming. Why on earth would I choose pottery? Okay. Learning goals today. What makes this cup so special? Wait a minute. It's meant to be lesson planning and long-term programming. The difference between lesson planning and programming and why we should all be doing it. What kind of cup am I? And a study opportunity if we get there. All right, so we're going to play a little game. I'd like you to have a notepad out, or an iPad, or a piece of paper, or maybe just your brain, and think about what makes this cup so special. I love how it's just, you guys are just cascading into Zoom. Again, because I'm a little bit sketchy, just, a couple of years ago, we'd have been like, okay, guys, there's this thing called chat. I want you to navigate to the bottom of your screen and click on the little talky thing and feel free to say what you like. But now it's just like, ask a question, boom, chat explodes. Great. Thank you very much. Okay, great. So creativity, it's handmade, it's winky wonky, it's wonky and cool, it's unique shape, it's homemade, it's different. There is no other cup like this one. Awesome. Great. Okay, next part of the game. What makes this cup so special? Not quite so many immediate responses. Not really special. It's easily made, reproducible, easily recognized. Yeah, all right, good. That's the kind of thinking we're after. There we go. Nice one, Ashley. Gives you the intended results. I'm not sensing a great deal of gratitude for the Industrial Revolution. Just saying, okay? I'm just saying, just putting it out there. All right, let's move on. Third and final cup. What makes this cup so special? Just quite a lot of people come in. Sorry, I didn't realise I haven't got time to say hi to everyone. Special shout out to Lisa Dawn Beckwith, though. Great to hear you, Lisa. And Hayley Hawkins. All right, it's unique. It has a story, right? It just stinks of story, doesn't it? Even if you don't know the story. Like if I tell you the story, you'll be like, wow, that's a good story, right? So, but you can just tell it seems to have a story. It's unique and its form, great. All right, awesome. It doesn't have a handle. Yep, got to love a cup without a handle. It's old, trustworthy, beautiful, love it. All right. So we've got 3 cups there. And really what I'm doing at the moment is I just want to frame where we're going. I promise we'll talk lots about Pilates and lesson planning. I just wanted to kind of get our brains sort of juiced up to the kind of way I think about this stuff. Because on the one hand, lesson planning is like ubiquitous to Pilates. You just have to do it. Or you think you don't. We'll talk about that. Or you already see the value and you totally lean into it. But I think it's worth thinking about more broadly, and that's what I'm trying to frame here. All right, so the first one, my mum made it. It took a really long time, right? So it's special because it took a long time. You can tell that, right? It meant a lot to her. She means a lot to me. So it's sentimental, right? It represents a willingness to try. Okay, it's a beginner's effort, right? And we know that. You look at that instinctively. You know it's not a master craftsperson. Correct? We agreed on that. Yeah. So it represents the beginning of a journey. So it's symbolic in that sense, and we know that intuitively. It's like if this was my mum or my kid, or it's like going to see a children's ballet concert. You don't expect it to be good, but you're grateful that you're going, right? So it's rich in that way, but it's pretty useless as far as cups go, right? This one's by Marimiko. It doesn't matter if you didn't know that. I wasn't testing you on your design knowledge, but it could be copied if only it went anywhere. It's well designed, it's highly functional, it's pleasant to use, and it's dishwasher safe. Right? Like, come on, it just, pardon my French, shits all over my mum's effort, right? Hers is probably thick with lead and you can't drink from it safely. Right? It's easily replaceable, but that's a great thing. Like, God, I mean, just nerd factor, I'm actually drinking from one, right? And if I break it, I can replace it. And I really like that it's got a thin lip. It's got lots of qualities that I really like, and I can replace it. It optimizes utility, design, and economics. Okay, so it's well designed. The handle works. The ceramics is fairly robust, and it's profitable, so they can keep making it. And it's scalable, repeatable, and profitable. And this one, the Kizé Monido, was made by an unknown potter, one of thousands thrown by hand, some 1,000-odd years ago. It's hundreds of years old. It is at once familiar and unique. It's a balance between uniformity and deformity. It was created in an unrepeatable set of circumstances. The colours, cracks, dribbles, and fire scars make it unique, even though its maker was producing thousands at a time that to the naked eyes would have appeared identical. So it bridges the worlds of my mum's pot and the Marimiko pot. Okay, it's at once mass-produced, but it's mass-produced by a craftsperson, by hand. but whose aim is to reproduce the same thing. Right? It's functional, it's utilitarian, but it's also imbued with personality. Okay? I once read a potter, a ceramicist, talk about their work and said that their best work happens when their back is turned. And I've always taken that to mean that when you're not focused on the creation, but you're focused on the process, that's when the good stuff happens. Okay, so that's what this pot represents to me. And anyway, as I said, this is framing. All right, so let's get stuck into it. We all write lesson plans, Andy. So this is a photograph of Breathe Wellbeing, where I taught, where I started teaching Pilates. So it's defunct now. It was, I started there about 10 years ago. And while I was doing my training, which I did there on the weekends, back in the days before Zoom, that was, some of you probably did your training like that. You go to a studio on the weekend when there was no classes, you do your training. That's what I was doing. I did that for basically a year. And so while I did that, I did a bunch of classes. As you can imagine, I'd go and do classes and I might do training. And I really looked up to the trainers that were working there. Again, as you'd expect, right? I'm surrounded by peers and I want to be like them. And the two people, well, three actually, there was three people to whom I went to the most classes. It wasn't that I most admired them, it was just they were the classes I could get to. And one of them was a gentleman called Andrew. And he was an ex-dancer and he was, I think, certainly close to, if not the most popular instructor in the studio. Taught probably 25, 30 classes a week, maybe more. And all of them had wait lists. It was like wait lists on the wait lists. And let's just have a quick look. That's a room full of 20 beds. And so 12 years ago, that's pretty groundbreaking. Not a lot of studios with 20 beds 12 years ago. And Andy had wait lists on his wait lists, right? And so I would go to his classes and I wanted to have, well, I wanted classes. And then once I got classes, I was hoping to have wait lists on my classes. So I was looking at what Andy and these other instructors did and thinking, I want to do what they do. And I said to Andrew one day, a little starry-eyed, I said, what do you do about lesson planning? Do you write lesson plans? He said, I don't write lesson plans. I was like, wow, shit. That's scary because he's got wait lists on his wait lists. And so I won't go into the content of his classes because that's beside the point. We'll talk about that in another session. But that moment passed. Anyway, as you might expect, I was writing lesson plans because I don't know about you guys, but when I was studying, I was writing lesson plans day in, day out, and they were terrible. And anyway, so get to the point, Heath. To go into these classes, there's 20 beds, right? And the classes were back to back. So if you were waiting for a class, you had to stand in a corridor and people very politely stood in this line waiting for the class to change over. So one day I was waiting and the instructor who was teaching wasn't Andrew. Andrew was going to take over and I was going to do Andrew's class. And there's a couple of minutes left. And I believe that he didn't write lesson plans because he would always be sitting in the change room until minutes before the class watching on iTunes or whatever, YouTube stuff. He'd just be noodling about until moments before. And I'd be like, how can you do that? Oh my God. Because if I'm going to be like, and it was true for the first while I taught, I'd be like for half an hour beforehand, rocking in the back room, trying to remember everything. And anyway, so I'm standing in line for the class and Andy comes in behind me and joins the line to wait, right? And it was a busy queue. There was, there was no point him pushing up to the front just yet. And he sort of said hello and I was pretty inconsequential to him. I don't think he even knew my name at this stage. And so I was standing next to him and I heard him talking to himself. And so I listened carefully, which is not weird. And he said to himself, he went like this. Okay, footwork, hands and straps, feet and straps, lunges, footwork, hands and straps, feet and straps, lunges. Okay, footwork, hands and straps, feet and straps, lunges. Okay, and then he walked up to the front of the queue and went in. And guess what we did in that class? Footwork, hands and straps, feet and straps, lunges, mermaid. That was it. sequences within those positions, but that was it. So my point here is Andy wrote lesson plans. It just took him 5 seconds. Okay. So that was a light bulb moment for me. And I was like, oh man, when I grow up, I want to be just like you. Took a long time. Well, no, I did that a few times and the classes were disasters. Eventually, I got to a point, and I'm sure some of you are there, where you just go, I'm like, what am I going to do now? I'm going to do that. Okay, good, done. Let's go. And off you go and you do it. Okay. But I think the only difference here is that, as far as I know, at that stage in his career, I don't know what Andrew's done since, he was an instructor, but not a manager, an instructor, but not a business owner. Okay. So he was planning for himself. What I found is I reached a point where I was doing that, and then I started to employ people and run a business. And I think that is the thing that took my thinking about lesson planning to another level, because I've spent now about 8 years thinking about lesson planning as a tool for facilitating growth in other instructors, and not always out of the goodness of my heart. I'm also trying to run a business. And so if an instructor comes into my business and they're not aligned with my brand or hitting the kind of marks that I need for the clients, my business suffers. Right? So that's what I'm trying to share. That's the background of where we're headed. Would anyone like to ask me any questions before I move into the next part of the chat, which is so far a monologue? Still hearing me okay? Okay. All right. So we all write lesson plans, Andy. What makes a good lesson plan? Punch it into the chat. Let's see what you got. Yeah, good. Oh, we're big on flow. Yep. Themes. Yeah, great. Yep. Full body, progressive. Jody Pike, I assume by progressive you mean it increases in challenge incrementally over time, as opposed to it's left thinking and non. Yeah. All right. So layers and 360. So I'm picking up some breathe grads in the room. Different body positions, progressions, layers. Everyone can do variations of exercise, encouraging movement for everyone. All right, starting to slow down now, the flow of the cascade of input. Different, yep, I haven't seen a new one for a while. Okay, let's have a look. Let's see what I've got and how that compares with what you've got. Start easy and build. Thank you, Lisa Dawn Beckwith, for coming in last moment there as the gate was closing. All right, so first off, come on, you guys. It should make your life easier. Shouldn't it? Cool. And you should get clients coming back for more. Anyone? And look, if I say anything here at this point you disagree, please disagree with me and let's talk it through. It's going to have a warm-up. Everyone agreed with that? Anyone disagree with having a warm-up? Probably needs a cool down. Probably in that order. Okay, it's going to strike a balance between repetition and variety within the class and over the weeks. That resonate for everyone? If you do the same thing all the time, you'll lose your clients. But then if you do different things all the time, you don't keep your clients. Okay, that's what it says on the packet. Anyone ever been to a beginner's class and find yourself doing no spring elephant? Or vice versa? You've gone to a level 3 annihilation class and you're doing footwork on 2 springs. Okay, so neither of those things are wrong, but they need to be aligned with what you were expecting when you come in. Okay, meets brand expectations. So by brand, I mean, where you're working. All right, so supports beginners. And it challenges stronger clients. I just wanted an opportunity to put a slide of Danielle Brandon in because she's bloody awesome. Okay, and it accommodates injuries. Can suit prenatal. Has peaks and troughs of intensity. So it's not always the same, intensity. You're not doing the 100 for 45 minutes, but you're not doing mermaid for 45 minutes. Okay, repeats challenges from previous sessions. How are we doing? Everyone in agreement with me so far? I'm sort of hoping when I wrote this out that it would sort of feel like I'm stating the obvious. Okay, so it's going to set the participants up for success. Which sort of sounds obvious when you say it, but it took me a long time to really work that out. It took a long time for me to understand, because when I was growing up in Pilates land, we were taught to do modifications, which I'll talk a bit more about later. But, the idea of modifying assumes the person has failed or is going to fail and you know it. And it took me a while. And finally, years, and I was like, well, why don't you just program so that they don't fail? Because that's hard, because you're programming for 15 people. Yeah, that's what I was hoping, Pedro. Well said. Okay, so it has an appropriate spread of body positions and muscle groups. Challenges you, the instructor. Contributes to your professional growth. By that, I mean you're evolving as an instructor, your skills are evolving, but also you're getting paid and moving up whatever payment structure you work within, and or moving from training towards management or team leadership or, whatever. Lesson plans should contribute to that. And it should flow like a river. So that's quite a lot, right? So firstly, does anyone disagree with me? Am I overthinking it? Am I over? Yeah, because when I was putting this together, I was thinking, I wonder if people will think I'm gilding the lily. And it's like, dude, shut up. Just do some footwork, some lunges, and some long stretch. That's all you need. Because that's the that's the conversation in my head. It took me, and eventually I thought to stop having that conversation because it's not productive. But Andy, right, and that model that I talked about of Andy just going, well, footwork, hands and straps, feet and straps, lunges, mermaid. Right? That says that's the end of the spectrum where when I put out a thing in social media and said, hey, do you do lesson plans? Really experienced instructors said, I don't plan lessons. I just walk in and see what happens, you know. I feel like I became like a French chef, you know. I just come in and I chop some things and I throw it. Anyway, I don't know what that accent is. But anyway, like, right. So, but that's the maestro, right? The maestro who shows up without planning, right? It's the story about Picasso sitting at the bar in his late 70s, does a scribble, throws it away, someone picks it up, and he says, no, you can't have that. And he says, why? You threw it away. And he said, it cost you $5,000. And he goes, what do you mean? Why? He said, I can throw it away because I've been doing this for 25 or whatever, 50 years, right? So, but that the value is not in the thing, the value is in the experience that you bring to bear in that moment. Yeah, does that make sense? Am I rambling? Am I mixing my metaphors too much? So probably. So I guess I wanted to just stop. And we've just done this long list of things that I think lesson plans ought to do for you as the instructor. But if we're going to do that, if we set out to do that with a lesson plan, that's quite the checklist, right? That's quite the matrix to go across and go, okay, so I've got my lesson plan of, what did Andy say? Footwork, hands and straps, feet and straps, lunges and mermaids. Check, 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 check. Does it do all of those things? That's quite the checklist, okay? Am I making sense? Like, it's like, so maybe I'm gilding the lily. Maybe it's like, just do some movement. And so, all right, but let's take a meta moment there and take, on the one hand, maybe lesson planning is just a bunch of exercises. And I'm gilding the lily and thinking too much about it. On the other hand, why is there a Pilates industry? Like, why is there a personal training industry? Why is there a fitness industry? Why didn't YouTube kill the fitness industry? Anyone have any thoughts? One reason might be the cost of reformers. That's valid. But why? But there's another one.
People like talking to people and being around other people.
Right. So whatever it is that we do, right, is not just reading a list of exercises. Because if it was just that, then YouTube would have killed the fitness industry or would continue to undermine the fitness industry more comprehensively. So at one end of the spectrum is just a list of exercises. But at the other end of the spectrum, we're teachers, we're leaders, we're motivators, our job is to inspire and to guide people to do things they haven't done before with their body. Yeah? And so somewhere in, and you know, like I had this whole bunch of slides that I didn't put in, but it was like, you know, the game we were going to play at the beginning about framing would be photos of Yoda and Luke, right? And Harry Potter and Dumbledore. You know, which one are we? Okay, because at the other end of the spectrum is we are leaders, we are motivators, we're guides, right? We're not the hero. I firmly believe that in the world that we live in, we're not the hero. And that's my big problem with a lot of social media and Instagram that I see is like, you're not the hero, dude. The hero is the client. The hero in our story is the client. And our job is to be the guide, is to be Yoda, speaking weirdly in the corner. That's why I've got no hair and big ears. I'm trying to be Yoda, right? So our job is to lift up the people we work for, right? And so, and like, then I think, then my inner critic comes in and goes, dude, come on, you're a Pilates instructor. Like, really, you're overthinking it. It's like, all right, maybe I'm overthinking it a little bit, but it's not just a list of exercises either. So somewhere in between is where we actually exist. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone? Yeah. So, and that's kind of where I'm coming at this from. Yeah. And yeah, how we make people feel. Nicely said, Danielle. All right, so we've got this long list of things that so far no one's challenged me on whether or not they're legitimately considered part of our lesson plan project. So, all right, Wise Guy, how do you do it? How do you write a lesson plan that does all of those things that doesn't take 9 hours? So, all right, let's start. I'm going to sort of zoom over how I'll just shut up. So, but what I do want to flag is that the terms that I'm going to use, layers and clusters, in the next few minutes, terms that I've used for years, and they've made their way into the Breathe Education Certificate. So if you've done that cert, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't done that cert, you don't. So I'm going to defer to the people that might not. So I will explain what they are, partly because that also helps to explain why they put the slides in. So start collecting layers. Layers, as you might have guessed, are exercise sequences that add layers of challenge incrementally. They start simple, they start slow, they start easy, and they build up from there. And generally speaking, in my head, they build towards a particular end point on any given day. So I'm setting off on a path, and I'm taking the people in front of me on a journey. And if we get there, we get there. And if we don't, it doesn't matter, because we've built in layers along the way, and I've observed where the challenges are, celebrated that with them, and held them to the challenge. All right, so, wrong button, sorry. So layers helped us to solve, amongst other things, modifications for injury. Okay? So if I start slow, simple, and basic, okay, in a basic body position, so let's say footwork or cat stretch, okay, I can build on that. And if I know about the injuries in the room, or even not, I've empowered people to not do anything that's a problem for them. I can see when it's a problem, because as I add each layer incrementally, I can see where the challenges creep in. Does that make sense? You see that in your mind? As opposed to starting with the 100 with straight legs low, okay, or starting with a full depth squat standing, I'm starting with something that if you got to class, you can do 20 of them. They accommodate for beginners for exactly the same reason. Okay? So if you start, if it starts simple, small, and light, okay, my mum can do 20. I used to say my nan, but I'm getting too old to say that now. So anyone who got to the studio can do 20 at the beginning of the layer, and then we build from there. And if I've got a stronger client, what do they experience? Just a light warm-up. They're just getting into the groove of the movements. Everyone with me? Yep. So they set people up for early success. I don't want to talk too much about motor learning in this session, but just to touch on it, motor learning being how humans learn movement, and the evidence shows us that's facilitated by 3 additive dimensions. Setting people up for early success using an external focus of attention and giving people choice. And incredibly, I've actually forgotten to write give choice within what layers give to us. So early success, it's exactly the same thing as I've already said. If everyone in the room can do it, well, you can't see my face. If everyone in the room can do 20, then everyone gets to succeed. Okay? And if I add a little bit of challenge and everyone but one in the room succeeds, great. And if I add another bit of challenge, everyone in but 3 challenge, and I keep adding challenge, and it gets harder for people, gets harder for people, gets harder for people, it gets harder for people, but everyone started with success. Okay. And so earlier when I talked about modification, I said that I thought, well, why don't you program in a way that doesn't need modifying? Okay. So start hard, modify is one framework. Start easy and build is the other framework. Okay? And so you could argue, but they still fail, right? You still have to, don't you still have to modify? Well, in a layer, the modification's been done for them because all they've got to do is drop back to the previous iteration. And so as an instructor, the language is If this gets too strong, drop back to the layer before. Drop back to the single leg. Drop back to the double leg. Drop back to the higher leg position. Drop back to the smaller range of motion. And they're dropping back to something they're familiar with that they succeeded at. So it's success, then failure. So, and what I've observed is what that facilitates is aspiration, right? I did this, I didn't quite get that, as opposed to I came to Pilates and I suck because I couldn't do the first thing we did. Layers help to solve for the warm-up. Right? So, like the layers are a warm-up, start easy and build it up. And they allow for peaks and troughs of intensity, right? Does that make sense? So like I can build, and then I can stop and do something else. All right, so that's all great. And there's more too. And we've got to talk for an hour about layers, no problem. I think we could, or certainly I could. But building layers is the secret sauce. But this is what I've observed because of what it does for us, the teacher. Okay? So what anyone hazard a guess about why you think I would say that? What do I mean that by building layers, so thinking about building sequences of exercises that build incrementally in challenge across time and across dimensions of movement, in strength, range of motion, control, either in single dimensions or multiple dimensions, why is that the secret sauce for the instructor? Why would I, as a mentor, think, go and build a bunch of layers and come back and I know you will be better? Anyone? You'll yeah, it'll put more tools in your toolbox. Yeah, but I could give you that. I could just go, here's a bunch of exercises. Makes lesson planning easier and more efficient. Yep, all of that's true. Makes easier planning, challenging our clients, ourselves. Right, so one client succeed. All right, yeah, now we're getting somewhere. Who wrote that? Concluding so quickly now, I can't catch the one I wanted to say. There we go. Darlene. So, Darlene, you get the chocolate bar. So, Darlene wrote in a deep understanding of the exercise. Okay. So, what happens if you go away and try and break something down into its component parts so that you can share it with anyone that comes to your class, regardless of age, ability, or strength? That's the same as ability. Okay. Means you can teach anyone who shows up on any day, as you know, the layers for success, right? And in order to do that, you have to completely, or at least almost completely, understand what makes the exercise difficult, right? Like, what is the thing that you're doing in the exercise, right? So the question is, what makes it hard? So what makes the 100 hard? That's a question, not a statement. Anyone? What makes the 100 hard on the reformer? Right, it's the weight of the straight legs, right? So fundamentally, the 100 on the reformer is a load endurance activity where you're also trying to pat your head and rub your tummy, right? And if you're going to do the breath pattern, more power to you, okay? But the really hard thing is to hold your long legs low. So how do you make the 100 easier? That answered the first question, right? You don't make the 100 easier by putting your head down. You make the 100 easier by bending your legs and maybe putting your head down. Okay? Do we agree on that? Like the hardest thing about the 100 is the long, low legs. How do you make it easier? You bend the legs. Right? Okay, great. What about star? What makes star hard? Bloody everything. Like, for God's sake, it's got everything. It's got strength, range of motion, and control all at the same time on one hand and one foot. Okay, so making that easier. I don't know. It start anywhere. Let's do it on bent elbow, bent knee, hand on the box. You see that one's a really hard one. Okay, but it's the same process. Does that make sense? Okay. What makes a lunge on 0 springs hard? Anyone? Do you know what I mean by lunge on 0 springs? So there's some balance, yep, which we can solve with the foot bar. It's all right. Is it, when I do a lunge, is it like star? Surely not, because it's basically like walking, but a bit harder, right? So it's a load challenge. So how would you make the lunge easier? Don't go as deep, or add a half spring. Okay? So you're back to it being easy to work out what makes it hard. Yeah, so the 100 and the lunge, simple movements, easily scalable, really good for layers. But then star, coordination, strength, and control. Sorry, coordination, strength, and range of motion. Got my C's mixed up. Okay, so that's really great for layering as well. But it's a really long layer. It might take you 6 months. Can you see what I did there? Does that make sense to you? Okay, cool. So this was all me riffing off the idea that the building layers is the secret sauce for the instructor, because when you build the layers, you have to deconstruct the exercise so that you understand what makes it difficult. When you understand what makes it difficult, it's easy to make it easy. When you can make it easy, you can start easy and build hard. Yeah. And then when you do that and you look at the person doing it, you know what's hard. You know where they're struggling. Okay? So that's where I was going with that. So we build layers. So we're just going to wave our magic wand, and we've built dozens of layers, and we're going to build those layers into clusters. Clusters in the language I'm using means a group of layered exercises that work multiple muscle groups in one basic orientation. So going back to we all write lesson plans, Andy went footwork, hands in straps, feet in straps. That was three clusters. Or maybe it was one cluster, but it was 3 fundamental sort of equipment settings, but in one body position. And in that class, that supine section went for half an hour. You with me? So the cluster is one basic orientation. Okay, so the cluster is broken if I go and get the long box, or it's broken if I stand up, bring the foot bar up, put all the springs on and turn around to face the foot bar, pull the arms, something like that. A major change in orientation or spring tension or equipment settings. Okay. So, I'm not telling you. What I suspect is that even if you don't speak the breathe terminology, if you've been around classes and thought about instructing, I'm just naming things that you've already got names for. All right. So clusters help to solve, amongst other things, for flow. They help us with long-term programming. They help us to manage variety and repetition. They help us to manage the peaks and troughs of intensity and an even spread of muscle groups. And plenty of other things too. All right, and so then we organize clusters into classes, just like these Lego blocks. Can you roughly kind of sort of see that in your mind? That out of these little layers of individual exercises, we build them into clusters that kind of sort of take place in one area of our teaching domain. You know, maybe it's a supine cluster or a short box cluster or a long box cluster or a foot long stretch cluster. And then those clusters can be chunked together into lesson plans. Yeah. And then we organize those classes into weeks. And I'm just going to wave a magic wand over that, because when I do that with instructors, it takes longer than we've got. But it's a very powerful process for the instructor. So that then you have a lesson, you have a program of lesson plans spread out across as many weeks as you want. And the system that I'm talking to randomizes as much as you want, or repeats as much as you want the exercises within it, because you're building it out of your layers and your clusters, and you're in control of it. All right. So I didn't want to get too much into the weeds about the hows of those things because we don't have time today. What I wanted to touch on was in the system that I have grown out of being an instructor and working with other instructors, there are layers, and the power of the layer is, it's great for the client. That's awesome. But it's really great for the instructor, because you have to understand what makes the exercise difficult. And when you can do that, when you really get it, you can help it make it, you can make it easier or harder for people easily. And even better, you can see you when you're doing a more complicated movement that's across multiple dimensions, so it's across range of motion and strength and control, you can see what the individual client is struggling with. And that, pardon my French, is the superpower that people think is special about Pilates instructors. How did they know to make it harder for me, especially by doing that? How did they know to make it easier just for me by doing that? Okay. And I feel quite strongly that when you've done this long enough, whether you recognize it or not, that's what you're doing. You understand the movement enough that when you look at person A struggling with it, you know that it's a strength dimension problem. But when you watch person C struggling with it, you know that it's a coordination struggle. That's the diagnosis part. But then the diagnostic part, I should say, once you've done that, then the skill to adjust the exercise in class on the fly with another 12 people in the room so that they succeed, that's a superpower. And thinking about your movements in terms of what makes it hard, which is the same as saying chop it into layers, that's how you become really, really good at that. So I wanted to talk about layers, and then once you've built layers, then you've got to do something with them. You build them into clusters, okay? And if you fold the layers onto one another, and a classic example would be footwork with shoulder bridges, right? So footwork tends to smoke your quads, right? Shoulder bridges tends to hit the back of the thigh, give or take a bunch of variables, okay? So you can layer back and forth. You can do footwork, single leg footwork with pulses. Plus you can do shoulder bridges, 2 feet, 1 foot pulses, blah, 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 right? So there's 2 layers that could be folded together. Or on another day, you do footwork for layers where you build, but it's a beginner class, or for whatever reason, you just do shoulder bridges as the break, right? To see and I didn't want to make it too complicated. I didn't want to push layers in both dimensions because I'm working with beginners. So I'm going to make a change every second cycle. But every other cycle, the alternate cycle, it's familiar. You get to take a breath, right? Does that make sense? You see, and half of you probably do that instinctively anyway. But what I'm talking about is a system that lets you actually track that across time. And then you build them into clusters. Then you build the cluster blocks like the Lego blocks into classes. Then you build the classes into weeks. And then you look at those weeks and you build that. And then you've got an 8, 12, 16, 24, 52-week plan. Okay. And that's what I call long-term programming. I haven't come up with a better name yet. All right. And so that's all good. So why long-term programming? Well, I mean, it's sort of the same reasons as a lot of the reasons we said about lesson planning. It sets you up for success. It facilitates your professional growth. All of those things. So yeah, these are some of the things that sit behind. But let me frame this. So the system that I just described really quickly. Now we haven't actually done it, right? We didn't have time today to do it. What I want to now talk about is my reflections on why it works. But then I don't have, what's my credibility in saying that? I've over the last 10 years, I've been forced by running a business to mentor a number of instructors, quite a number. This system evolved out of doing that. And it works really well now, but it didn't work really well at the beginning, right? So it took a long time to work really well. So what I want to share now is some reflections that I've put together on why it works. Does that make sense? Yeah. I won't bore you with the details of how I know it works, except that, I don't know, I've got a really freaking awesome team of instructors that work for me. And I've shared this at Breathe to lots of instructors and have heard back from them later that my sharing of this system was a very important part of their growth as an instructor. So I won't bore you with the details. Okay, so the law of specificity. You get good at what you practice. Okay, so if you practice just working on lesson plans in isolation without them having a broader context, without them being part of an overarching plan or system or goal or mission, then you're practicing just generating random lesson plans that just don't have a relationship to one another across the weeks or the months or the day. You know, so you get what you practice. But this is also true to clients, to movements, right? So if you want to get good at high bridge, if you want to get good at star, you've got to do star, you've got to do high bridge. But that comes back to, well, hold on, if you're the instructor and you decide you want to do classical movements like that, if you don't have a system for spreading those movements across your weeks and months, how do you know that your clients aren't always showing up and getting the high bridge day, or they aren't always getting the star day? And maybe you only teach 2 classes a week. Okay, great, you can manage that. Most people teach somewhere between 10 and 30. Good luck remembering 3 weeks ago what you did on Monday if you haven't got a plan. Right? So you get what you practice. And all right. So you reduce the variables. Right? So if you throw open, every lesson plan is open to whatever exercises you want to do, or every week is open to whatever exercises you feel like. That's chaos. That is the definition of chaos. Okay? And that is not good for clients. Right? Clients need a balance of predictability and variety. Okay? And I don't think it's enough just to do the same warm-up every time, even though I do just generally do basically the same warm-up every time. I don't think that's enough. I think there needs to be threads of predictability and variety through the classes. And again, instinctively, intuitively, I imagine most of us do that anyway. But if you don't have a plan, sometimes you're doing it really well, sometimes you're not, and you don't know when it's working, and you can't reflect on what you were doing when it was working really well. Make sense? If you don't have a plan that you can look back on across not only the week but the months, right? Well, what happens if you sit up bolt upright in bed and think, man, I freaking nailed that class last week. I can't quite remember what I was teaching though. If you've got no map at all, you've got no chance of remembering. So reducing the variables is pick a thing and do it. Right? And then rather than adding more and more and more, just keep looking at it, just keep looking at it, just keep looking at it, and only add one new thing at a time. So that when you add the new thing, if everything goes south, you know what it was. You didn't quite nail the new thing, as opposed to you added 4 new things and the class was awesome. You don't know what made it so awesome. Or 4 new things and the class was a disaster. You don't know which things to take out. Okay? I'm oversimplifying this a little bit, but all right. And then, so repeat the process and ignore your feelings. So if and when you put a plan like this in place, at a certain point, you'll feel like you're in a, what are those things? A straitjacket. You want to break free, right? You just want to cut loose and do crazy stuff and make shit up on the fly. And, that's fine. You can do that. But when I've run this with instructors, almost invariably at around about somewhere between the 4 and 6 week mark, they say, I hate you. They say that, like, I hate you at the moment. I hate this program. I hate the lesson plans. I'm sick of it. I'm bored. I'm sure the clients are bored. I'm going crazy. And I say something along the lines of, I don't actually say this, but, for effect, you can stop if you want, but you don't have a job. So it's like the agreement we made was that you're going to do this. And they go, and we come to an agreement that they continue or not. That's happened. But assuming they continue, a little bit later, suddenly they discover, oh my God, I can see so much. I have so much time in my teaching. Right? Like where I was frustrated, now I have space. Now I have clarity about why the person's struggling. I can predict what's going to happen for the clients in the next 5 minutes so accurately that I can tell them. I can tell them that you're going to feel this, you're going to want to do this, you're going to hate me for this, and you're going to love me for this. And I'm right about it all. And it's all because they repeated the things. Does that make sense? So it goes back to the reduce the variables. Right? Teach basically the same exercises in slightly different ways across multiple weeks and observe what happens and reflect on the changes, and you'll learn from it. And you become a master, that's the specificity, of the thing. Okay? You can't master everything at once. So why not master a small subset of movements and lesson plans across a fixed period of time so that you are a master of those things? Because then you can transpose or extrapolate that mastery across other exercises more efficiently. That's what I've seen time and time again. So you repeat the process, you keep teaching the lesson plans, you stick to the program, even though you'll freaking hate the person that's helping you put it in place, and you'll feel bored. And of course, the other rule is you're bored before your clients. Okay. And then at the end of the process, you review, you reflect, and you refine. Okay. So you look back on what you did, you reflect on what worked well, you refine, you make some minor changes, because you're reducing the reducing the variables. You don't want to make huge changes to everything. Just make a few changes, and then you repeat. Do the same process again. And at some stage, and I've seen this time and time again, the process becomes organic. Right? At some stage, you don't have to write it all down. Okay? At some stage, you become Andy. You're just walking up to a class, and it forms in your head almost without you thinking. Okay, and that somewhere in there, you get to think about what kind of cup you want to make. Do you want to make a highly so do you remember the cups? Going back about an hour, right? Remember my mum's cup? Took her forever. It's a highly unique, very special. Not great as a cup, but very special. And it's got that unique quality. You can do that. You can spend hours on your lesson plans. Or you could make a mass-produced Marimekko cup. Now, and I'm not dissing mass production, right? I'm a big fan of it. And that's what's given us the industry we're in. The ability to scale client experience through lesson plans is how you've got a job if you've got a job at a studio that's a franchise or has multiple studios. That's part of what they've done. Right? They have found things that they can repeat, scale, and share, or share and scale. Okay, and that's what I meant by brand alignment in your lesson planning. And you may have to do that with this program. With this kind of approach, you may have to tweak it to meet a brand. Yeah. And then the third cup, the Kazei Monido, the handmade Japanese tea bowl, it's actually Korean, but it's the Japanese national treasure. That's kind of, for me, that's the highest expression of what we can do. I repeat, most of what I do, I'm repeating, and I'm trying to make it the same, right? But in the trying is the failing, and in the failing is where the creativity is. And so when I come to you as a client, I'm trying to move you and everyone like you towards a whole bunch of different places, but I'm trying to progress you along the layers towards being stronger, being more flexible, more coordination, being a happier person through movement. Okay. And as we fail, I learn about why you failed, and I get better at teaching. And as I fail, I learn about why I failed, and I get better at teaching. And whether we get there or not is beside the point. It's in the trying, right? So in the Kazei Monido, it's in the trying to make the bowl the same every single time, okay, that the failing happens and that you get the art. You get the unrepeatable bowl. Does that make sense? Whereas if you sit down like my mum and you try and make something special, it is special, but it's not repeatable. It's not shareable. It's not very functional. Right? People who aren't your family don't really care about it. Does that make sense? Roughly, kind of, sort of. I'm probably a bit esoteric with the bowls. Okay. So I've talked about this system, and this is a sales moment because I'm really passionate about this, and I've been given the opportunity at Breathe to run a program that teaches you how to do it. So it's a 6-week program that I've designed, and it's a teased out version of what I've done at White Dog Studio with my instructors over the last 5 years. I'd say 5 years is when I started to really get this system working really well. And yeah, so it's a 6-week program. It's 6 lectures. There'll be a little bit of homework, and I'll take you through the process that I described today. You'll build out your layers. You'll build out clusters. You'll build them into weekly plans, and then you'll run that plan, and then you'll reflect on it. You'll refine it. You'll review it. You'll refine it, and you'll rerun it. And yeah, it's called the what are we calling it? It's called the 60-second class program. Is the name of the program, which is a little bit tongue in cheek. Right? It goes back to we all write lesson plans, Andy. So because when I've spoken to instructors and said, you know, what would success look like in your lesson planning? Consistently, the answer is I wouldn't need to write a lesson plan. Like I'd just be able to just show up and be the maestro, right? I can just show up and just teach off the cuff, like all the people who I admire as a developing instructor. And I'm like, yeah, I totally get that. That was me. The irony is that if I have to get you to be a good enough instructor to help me run my business, you don't get to do that. You don't get to show up and just make shit up until you're good at it. Because in the meantime, my business dies. Right? So one thing would be only hire instructors who are already fully evolved. I don't like that. I want to be able to grow people and be part of the process. All right, so build a system. So I built the system, test the system. System works really well. Now I'm going to share the system. Okay. And what's awesome is if you aren't already doing this in some way, shape, or form, I guarantee that even if you've been teaching for 10 years, your teaching will go next level if you force yourself to do this. Because I did it to myself. And like I said at the beginning, I'm really bad at systems, right? I'm not very good at dotting I's and crossing T's. I'm a creative, okay? When I forced myself to do this, my teaching went next level, and so that was the thing that really tipped me over. So that's some thoughts on lesson planning. And if you're interested, you can check out the course. I think it starts in about 6 weeks. It will run for 6 weeks. It's 6 lectures, and I'll do my best to download all of that into your brain. And I just realized I'm over time. Sorry, rambling a bit. If you've got any questions, I can stay. If you need to go, you should probably go. Thanks for your effort and attention, folks.
Heath, can I have a question?
Yeah.
What kind of tools or platforms when you use to build up the long-term class planning, which is more virtualized, that you can see the programming and you can easily change like the details, do the refining?
Sorry, could you ask that again?
Yeah, like what kind of tools or platforms, app, or when you do writing or you just memorize on your keyboard, like to build the long-term class planning, like which can easily be visualized and refined? Yeah,
sure. You've got a great question. So if in this system, we'll build out spreadsheets. So this is what I get my instructors to do now is they collect the layers. So when I said collect layers, I literally mean collect layers, and they write them out in a structured format, and then we take them and we build them into clusters. Okay, and in a lot of the cases, that's more capturing what you already know. It's not like you're making it up from scratch, but you spend the time ordering what you know, and then from that you build that into lesson plans in your spreadsheet, and then from that we work depending on how you like to think. So you might draw, you might write, you might take in your iPhone, whatever, and you end up with a representation of each lesson plan. And that's different for each person. And then that's what you take with you into classes. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So what you end up with is an archive. Well, archive's not the right word, because you end up with a storehouse of your layers that you know, it's not fixed. You change it whenever you want, and your clusters and your lesson plans that lives in Google Sheets, right? And so it's a living, breathing document. But then from that, how you take that into class is personal. Gillian, you asked, would this course work for someone who teach? Yeah. So the course will be, so it'll be, the structure of this works regardless of where you teach. So you'll do the activity, if you do the course, you'll do the activities to your teaching. And so that it'll be applicable to your teaching. It's particularly useful for group. I suppose I should have said this. The basic context of this is group, reformer, and mat teaching. If you're teaching small group or clinical, you've got a whole different set of problems to solve. And so they're overlapping, but this system and this program will be for group teachers. Any other questions? I'm more than happy to chat more.
Ashley's just asked in the chat if the lectures are recorded to watch later.
The lectures will be recorded. I'm not sure what, you won't have to attend live. I don't know if they'll be available forever or what that structure will be, but they'll definitely be, you don't have to attend live. You'll be able to watch them on record and watch them on record for some period of time. Yeah. And does the homework involve writing spreadsheets? Well, you won't, amazingly, right? You won't have to write the spreadsheet. You'll be given it'll be a template. You just fill in the blanks, and and it'll be like, you're never going to submit it. I'm never going to assess it. So if you decide to do it on paper or you use a different platform, that's fine. How do you sign up? You can sign up now. Carol put the link in the chat, I believe, and it's open for purchase now, the course. If there's some limit on places, but we've only just opened it up, so if you're keen, jump in quick, but it's not about to sell out. And what was the other question? How do we sign up? Where do we go? Do I go over the spreadsheets with us? So I'm not individually going to look at your spreadsheets one-on-one, but we will be working on the spreadsheets as part of the program. So it won't be like lectures where all I do is talk. It'll be very interactive. We're talking through the concepts. You'll do homework. The more you do of the homework, the more you'll get out of the program. So, but I won't have time I don't imagine, to sit down and go through everyone's spreadsheet with them one by one, but we will talk through the processes as you work through them, and you'll test them on the classes you're teaching, and you'll get feedback from the classes you're teaching on how effectively you're layering and clustering. And as the weeks go by, you'll refine that process, and towards the end, we'll build it into the long-term thing. And then you'll go out and apply it. Some people will write it for 10 weeks. Some people will write it for 12 months. And it might sound ridiculous, but I've got no doubt that by the time we get to the end of the 6 weeks, you could probably write 12 months worth of lesson plans in less than an hour, probably less than half an hour, and then stick to it if you wanted to. So Natasha asked, how many hours a week is it? It'll be a 90-minute lecture per week. And then kind of piece of string. It depends how much time you want to. So if I say to you, one of the projects will be to order all of the exercises you teach into layers in the spreadsheet. I can't tell you how long that'll take you, but it doesn't have to be done in a week. It's the beginning of a process. So the success would be, and I'm confident of this, is that the person who's in the program comes out at the end with this document that they're familiar using, but it's not finished. So it's like, Natasha comes to my class and she goes, I loved that sequence he did with the short box. I'm going to put that in my archive. She goes home and adds the sequence she did in my class to that, and then she builds that into her next round of programming and tests it and evolves it and makes it her own. So it's like that's what I meant by storehouse. So it's not something you download from your brain and never look at or adjust again. It's just the beginning of a process. So and that's what this program is. It's sort of like it's a framework that allows you to order your thinking, your teaching across weeks and months in a way that actually improves what you're doing and improves client outcomes, rather than just randomly teaching week in, week out, which once you've been doing that for a few years, you need something to structure it and help it go to another level. So that, yeah, face-to-face 90 minutes and then whatever you can put into it in between. Any other questions? Carol's just dropped, yeah. Oh, sorry, link for the next one. Yep.
Thanks so much, Heath, and get well soon.
So the time for the lectures, that's a good question. I think it's basically going to be this time. I think it's a Tuesday morning, my morning. So I probably got that wrong. So
It's 5:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning.
on a Thursday, begins with T. There you go. I was in the right ballpark. 5:30 my Thursday a.m., which would be Wednesday evening, Northern Hemisphere. Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun. I've, like I said, I've been developing it for years. I'm very confident that if you lean into it, it'll change your game. Yeah. All right. Well, in the absence of any further questions and the fact that we're a little bit over time, thank you again for your effort, your attention. And maybe I'll see you in the 60-second class program.
Thanks, Heath.
See you all.